Tom was a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, though most people only saw a quiet and reserved figure. He had served his country with pride for over a decade, earning medals that now sat unused in a dusty box under his bed. The battlefield had been his home for years, but it left him scarred in ways no one could see. When Tom returned to civilian life, he thought the hardest part of his journey was behind him. He was wrong. Every day felt like walking through a minefield. The sound of fireworks sent him diving for cover, convinced they were explosions. Crowded grocery stores made his heart race as if enemies surrounded him. Sleep came rarely, and when it did, it brought vivid nightmares that left him drenched in sweat and gasping for air. Doctors called it post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, but to Tom, it felt like living in a prison without walls. Medications helped some days, but others were unbearable. He often wondered how much longer he could keep going. Then, one crisp autumn morning, everything changed. A friend from the veteran support group suggested Tom apply for a service dog. At first, Tom hesitated. He didn't want to rely on anyone or anything for help. But desperation outweighed his pride. After months of waiting and evaluations, Tom met Max. Max was a golden retriever with soft amber eyes that seemed to look right into Tom's soul. From the moment their hands touched, Max's paw resting gently on Tom's outstretched palm, it was clear this wasn't just any dog. This was family. Max wasn't just trained to follow commands. He was taught to sense emotions before Tom even realized he was struggling. On bad days, Max would nudge Tom's leg, urging him to take deep breaths. If Tom froze in fear during a loud noise, Max would circle around him protectively until the panic passed. And at night, when the nightmares clawed their way into Tom's dreams, Max would wake him with gentle licks, pulling him back to reality. Slowly, Tom began to feel alive again. Not cured, but less alone. Max became his anchor in a stormy sea. Life wasn't perfect, but it was manageable with Max by his side. Together they navigated crowded streets, attended therapy sessions, and even ventured into places Tom once avoided. People noticed the pair wherever they went. Kids wanted to pet. Max and strangers stopped to ask about his vest, which proudly declared him a service dog. Tom usually smiled politely and explained that Max wasn't just a pet. He was essential. Most people understood, nodding respectfully, but not everyone got it. One chilly spring afternoon, while running errands, Tom received a letter that would test the strength of his bond with Max. It was from his landlord, demanding he remove the animal from the premises immediately. According to the letter, Tom's lease agreement prohibited pets, and despite multiple warnings, he hadn't complied. Tom read the words over and over, disbelief washing over him. Max wasn't a pet. He was medical equipment, as vital to Tom's survival as a wheelchair or insulin pump. Yet here was someone treating him like a nuisance. Determined to resolve the issue peacefully, Tom gathered documents proving Max's status as a legitimate service dog. There were certification papers, letters from doctors, and even photos showing Max assisting him in various situations. Armed with evidence, Tom approached his landlord, hoping reason would prevail. Instead, he was met with hostility. The landlord scoffed, claiming the rules were clear: no pets allowed. When Tom tried explaining federal laws protecting service animals, the landlord dismissed him, saying those laws didn't apply in this case. Frustrated but unwilling to give up, Tom sought legal advice. What started as a simple misunderstanding soon spiraled into a full-blown legal battle, culminating in a court hearing scheduled for the following month. As the date approached, Tom grew increasingly anxious. Courtrooms weren't exactly comforting spaces, especially for someone like him. The thought of facing judgmental stares and harsh words made his stomach churn. But more than anything, he worried about being separated from Max, even temporarily. The idea of walking into that cold, sterile room without his loyal companion felt impossible. Still, Tom prepared himself as best he could, rehearsing what he'd say and gathering every piece of documentation that proved Max's necessity. Little did he know, the courtroom drama ahead would challenge not only his courage, but also the unshakable bond between him and Max. The morning of the court hearing arrived, gray and overcast, matching the heavy feeling in Tom's chest. He woke up earlier than usual, his mind racing with thoughts of what might happen. Would the judge understand? Would they see Max not as a pet but as the lifeline he truly was? As Tom got ready, Max stayed close, sensing his handler's unease. The dog's presence was calming, but even Max couldn't fully erase the knot of worry twisting inside Tom. When they arrived at the courthouse, Tom felt out of place. The building loomed large and imposing, its tall columns and stern-faced security, guards making him feel small. Inside, the air was cool and carried the faint smell of polished wood and old paper. People bustled about, some dressed in suits, others clutching folders and notebooks. Tom tightened his grip on Max's leash, drawing strength from the steady pressure of the harness in his hand. They checked in with the clerk, who gave them a curious glance before directing them to wait outside the courtroom. As they sat on a bench in the hallway, Tom went over his notes one last time. He had practiced his speech until he could recite it in his sleep, but now sitting there under the fluorescent lights, doubt crept in. What if the judge didn't care about the laws? What if they sided with the landlord, forcing him to choose between keeping his home and staying with Max? The thought made his heart race. Max must have sensed the shift in Tom's mood because he leaned closer, resting his head on Tom's knee. Tom scratched behind Max's ears absent-mindedly, finding comfort in the rhythmic motion. Finally, a bailiff called their names, and Tom stood, taking a deep breath. Max rose with him, always alert, always ready. Together they entered the courtroom, which was smaller than Tom had imagined, but no less intimidating. The judge sat high above everyone else, her expression unreadable. Lawyers shuffled papers at their tables, and spectators filled the rows of wooden benches. Tom took his seat at the plaintiff's table, Max lying quietly beside him. For a moment, everything seemed okay. Then the proceedings began. Tom's lawyer spoke first, laying out the case clearly and calmly. He explained the federal laws protecting service animals, cited examples of similar cases, and presented the stack of documents proving Max's training and necessity. Tom listened intently, nodding along as each point reinforced what he already knew. Max wasn't just a dog. He was part of his treatment plan, prescribed by doctors to help manage his PTSD. But when the landlord's lawyer stood to argue, things took a turn. The opposing counsel focused heavily on the lease agreement, pointing out that it explicitly banned pets. "This is a clear violation," he said, his tone firm. "Rules are rules, Your Honor. Allowing an exception sets a dangerous precedent." He emphasized the word pets repeatedly, ignoring the distinction between a service animal and a regular household pet. Tom clenched his fists under the table, frustration bubbling up. It wasn't fair. They weren't talking about a cat or a hamster. This was Max, the reason Tom could function day to day. When it was Tom's turn to speak, he stood nervously, gripping the edge of the podium. His voice trembled at first, but as he talked about his struggles with PTSD and how Max had changed his life, he found a rhythm. He described waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, only to find Max nudging him awake. He told the court about times when panic attacks threatened to overwhelm him, and how Max's gentle presence pulled him back from the brink. "Max isn't just a dog," Tom said, his voice breaking slightly. "He's my partner. Without him, I don't know if I'd be here today." For a moment the room was silent. Even the judge seemed to soften, her pen pausing mid-note. But then came the unexpected blow. After listening carefully, the judge looked directly at Tom and issued an order that stunned him. "Mr. Harris," she said, her tone clipped and official, "you will need to step outside with your dog while we deliberate further. This is a formal setting and we cannot have distractions during these proceedings." Her words hit Tom like a punch to the gut. Tom protested immediately, explaining that separating him from Max would trigger his anxiety and make it impossible for him to focus. "Your Honor," he pleaded, "he's trained to stay calm and quiet. He won't cause any trouble, I promise." But the judge remained unmoved. With a flick of her wrist, she reiterated her decision. Defeated, Tom nodded reluctantly and turned to Max. The dog looked up at him, confused but obedient. Together, they left the courtroom, stepping into the empty hallway. Once outside, Tom sank onto the nearest bench, his hands trembling. Without Max beside him, the world felt louder, sharper, more hostile. Every sound, the echo of footsteps, the murmur of distant voices, seemed amplified. His chest tightened and he struggled to breathe deeply. Max sat next to him, pressing his body against Tom's leg in silent support. Though he tried to steady himself, Tom couldn't shake the sinking feeling that he was fighting a losing battle. Inside the courtroom, decisions were being made without him, and all he could do was wait. But unbeknownst to Tom, something remarkable was about to happen. Back in the courtroom, tension simmered as the lawyers continued their arguments. The judge listened intently, weighing the evidence before her. Yet even as the discussion dragged on, a subtle shift occurred, something none of them anticipated. While Tom waited anxiously in the hallway, Max began to act in a way that would soon change everything. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Lawyers exchanged sharp words, their voices rising and falling like waves crashing against rocks. The judge sat stoically at her bench, her face a mask of impartiality as she scribbled notes on a legal pad. Spectators whispered among themselves, some glancing toward the empty seat where Tom had been sitting moments earlier. No one paid much attention to the closed door behind which Tom and Max waited. Or so they thought. Unseen by anyone, something unusual was happening. Max, though trained to remain calm in chaotic environments, seemed restless. His ears twitched at every sound coming from the courtroom, muffled voices, the scrape of chairs, the rhythmic tapping of the judge's pen. He could sense Tom's absence acutely even through the thick wooden door. It wasn't just loyalty driving him, it was instinct. Max knew his human needed him, and he wasn't about to let anything stand in the way. Back inside, the landlord's lawyer was making his final points, emphasizing the importance of enforcing rules equally for all tenants. If we allow exceptions, he argued, gesturing broadly, it undermines the integrity of the entire agreement. The judge nodded slowly, considering his words. Just as she opened her mouth to respond, a soft but unmistakable sound interrupted the proceedings. At first, no one noticed. It was faint, almost like a distant sigh, but then it came again, louder this time, a low whine, filled with longing and determination. Heads turned toward the source of the noise. There, standing near the entrance of the courtroom, was Max. Somehow the clever dog had slipped past the bailiff stationed outside. His leash trailed behind him, and his amber eyes scanned the room until they landed on the empty chair where Tom usually sat. Without hesitation, Max trotted forward, his paws clicking softly against the polished floor. Every eye in the room followed him, stunned into silence. The judge froze mid-sentence, her pen hovering above her notepad. For a moment, no one dared to move or speak. Max reached the vacant seat, circled it once as if ensuring it was the right spot, and then sat down with perfect composure. He looked directly at the judge, his expression somehow both pleading and resolute. Then, as if to drive his point home, Max let out another soft whine, a sound that carried an emotional weight far beyond its volume. It wasn't loud or disruptive, but it resonated deeply, cutting through the formality of the courtroom like a knife. For several seconds, the room remained utterly still. Even the lawyers, who had been arguing passionately moments before, were too shocked to react. The bailiff hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or wait for instructions. The spectators exchanged bewildered glances, some smiling despite themselves at the sight of the golden retriever taking such a bold stance. And the judge? She stared at Max, her stern demeanor faltering ever so slightly. Finally, one of the attorneys broke the silence. "Your Honor," he said cautiously, pointing toward Max, "I think perhaps this demonstrates exactly why Mr. Harris needs his dog with him at all times." His tone was measured, but there was a hint of admiration in his voice. Others in the room murmured an agreement, nodding subtly. Even the landlord's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing that the tide might be turning. The judge leaned back in her chair, studying Max intently. Her expression softened, though only slightly. "This is highly irregular," she remarked, more to herself than anyone else. She glanced at the bailiff, who shrugged helplessly. Turning her gaze back to Max, she added, "But I suppose we can't ignore the fact that this animal seems quite determined to stay close to his handler." Max didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his tail thumping gently against the floor, as if to emphasize his resolve. To everyone watching, it was clear that this wasn't just a random act of disobedience, it was a deliberate statement. Max wasn't causing trouble. He was advocating for Tom in the only way he knew how. The dog's unwavering presence spoke volumes about the bond between man and animal, a connection so strong that it defied logic and crossed boundaries. One of the spectators, an older woman seated near the front, leaned over to whisper to her companion. "That dog knows what he's doing," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "You can see it in his eyes." Her companion nodded, visibly moved. Across the room, even the bailiff cracked a small smile, unable to suppress his admiration for Max's audacity. As the moment stretched on, the mood in the courtroom shifted. What had started as a rigid, formal hearing began to feel more human. People weren't just discussing laws and leases anymore. They were witnessing something profound. Max's actions reminded everyone present of the power of love and loyalty, qualities that transcended legal jargon and property agreements. Slowly but surely, the focus of the case changed. It was no longer about whether Tom had violated a rule. It was about recognizing the vital role Max played in his life. The judge cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention back to her. She looked at Max one last time before speaking. "Well," she said, her voice softer now, "this certainly complicates matters." Pausing briefly, she added, "Let's bring Mr. Harris back in. I believe we need to hear more from him and possibly from his very persistent advocate here." With that, the bailiff hurried to fetch Tom, leaving Max seated proudly in the courtroom. As the door reopened and Tom stepped inside, his eyes widened in disbelief. Seeing Max calmly occupying his usual spot, he felt a surge of gratitude and pride. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. Max had made sure the court understood exactly how important he was to Tom's survival. Tom stood frozen in the doorway, his heart pounding as he took in the scene before him. Max was sitting exactly where he had been earlier, his golden coat gleaming under the courtroom lights. The dog's tail wagged gently, and his amber eyes locked onto Tom with an expression of pure devotion. For a moment, Tom couldn't believe what he was seeing. How had Max managed to get back into the courtroom? And why hadn't anyone stopped him? But there was no time to dwell on those questions. All that mattered was the undeniable fact that Max had refused to stay away. The judge gestured for Tom to take his seat again, her voice calm but tinged with curiosity. "Mr. Harris," she said, "it seems your dog has decided to make his own case." A ripple of quiet laughter spread through the room, breaking some of the tension. Even the landlord's lawyer cracked a faint smile, though he quickly tried to mask it. Tom hesitated, unsure how to respond. He glanced at Max, who tilted his head slightly, as if urging him to trust him. Taking a deep breath, Tom walked forward and sat down beside Max, placing a hand on the dog's back. The simple act grounded him, steadying his nerves just enough to face whatever came next. The judge leaned forward, resting her elbows on the bench. "I must admit," she began, her tone thoughtful, "this is not something I encounter every day. Your dog clearly values his role in your life, and he's made sure we all understand that." She paused, glancing around the room as if seeking confirmation from the others present. When no one objected, she continued, "Before we proceed further, Mr. Harris, I'd like you to explain more about how Max assists you, not just legally or medically, but personally. Help us understand why this bond is so critical." Tom swallowed hard, feeling the weight of everyone's attention on him. He knew this was his chance to make them see what Max truly meant to him. Gathering his courage, he began to speak, his voice trembling at first but growing stronger with each word. He described the darkest days after returning home from the military, when even the simplest tasks felt insurmountable. He talked about the nights when sleep eluded him, haunted by memories he couldn't escape. And then he spoke about Max, the way the dog seemed to know when he needed comfort, how his presence brought peace during moments of chaos. "He doesn't just follow commands," Tom explained, his voice thick with emotion. "He senses things, before I do. If I'm about to have a panic attack, he'll nudge me or lean against me until I focus on breathing. At night, when I wake up screaming, he's there, licking my face or pawing at me to bring me back to reality. He reminds me that I'm safe even when I don't feel it." As he spoke, Tom reached down to scratch behind Max's ears, his fingers brushing against the soft fur. Max leaned into the touch, closing his eyes contentedly, as if absorbing every word. The courtroom was silent except for Tom's voice, which carried a raw honesty that resonated with everyone present. Some spectators nodded sympathetically, while others wiped away tears. Even the judge seemed moved, her pen hovering above her legal pad as she listened intently. When Tom finished speaking, he looked directly at her, his eyes pleading. "Your Honor," he said softly, "Max isn't just a service dog, he's my lifeline. Without him, I don't know if I could keep going. Please, please let me keep him with me." For a long moment, the judge didn't respond. She studied Tom carefully, her gaze shifting occasionally to Max, who sat patiently beside him. Finally, she sighed deeply, leaning back in her chair. "This is a difficult situation," she admitted, her voice softer now. "On one hand, we have clear rules regarding pets in rental properties. On the other, we have federal protections for individuals with disabilities, and apparently a very determined dog who refuses to be ignored." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and the judge raised a hand to silence it. "What strikes me most," she continued, "is the undeniable connection between you and your dog. It's evident in the way he behaves, not just here today but in the stories you've shared. This isn't simply about convenience, it's about necessity. I can't ignore that." She paused, looking at Max once more. "And frankly, I don't think any of us will soon forget the image of him walking into this courtroom and making his feelings known." The landlord's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing the tide turning against him. He opened his mouth to argue, but the judge cut him off with a raised hand. "Counselor," she said firmly, "I understand the importance of maintaining rules. However, laws exist to protect people, not to make their lives harder. In this case, enforcing the lease agreement as written would cause undue hardship for Mr. Harris and potentially jeopardize his well-being. That's not justice." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Tom felt a flicker of hope ignite within him, though he dared not let himself believe it yet. The judge turned her attention back to him, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Harris," she said, "based on the evidence presented, and yes, your dog's rather persuasive demonstration, I am granting you permission to keep Max with you in your apartment. This ruling aligns with federal disability laws, which take precedence over local restrictions." The room erupted into murmurs of approval, and Tom's heart soared. Tears welled up in his eyes as he turned to Max, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. Max responded by licking his face enthusiastically, his tail wagging furiously. For the first time in weeks, Tom felt a sense of relief wash over him. They had won, not just the case, but a reaffirmation of the bond that kept him anchored to the world. As the judge dismissed the court, several spectators approached Tom to congratulate him. One woman handed him a tissue, her own eyes glistening with tears. "That was beautiful," she said simply. Others nodded in agreement, smiling warmly. Even the bailiff gave Max a friendly pat on the head before heading out. The landlord's lawyer lingered briefly, shaking his head in disbelief, but eventually left without another word. Outside the courthouse, the sky had cleared, sunlight breaking through the clouds. Tom knelt beside Max, hugging him tightly. "You did it, buddy," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "We did it." Max barked softly as if agreeing, and licked Tom's cheek affectionately. Together, they walked toward the parking lot. The weight of uncertainty lifted from their shoulders. Though challenges might still lie ahead, Tom knew one thing for certain. As long as Max was by his side, he could face anything. The victory in the courtroom felt surreal to Tom, like stepping out of a storm into calm, warm sunlight. As he and Max made their way back home, the world seemed brighter, less daunting than it had been just hours earlier. The tension that had gripped Tom's chest for weeks finally eased, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, savoring the freedom of knowing he wouldn't have to fight this battle alone anymore. When they arrived at the apartment complex, Tom hesitated outside the door. Memories of the landlord's stern warnings and angry letters flooded his mind, but he pushed them aside. He reminded himself of the judge's ruling, of the stack of documents tucked safely in his bag, and most importantly, of Max's unwavering loyalty. With a deep breath, he unlocked the door and stepped inside, Max trotting confidently beside him. The familiar creak of the floorboards underfoot and the soft hum of the refrigerator greeted them, grounding Tom in the reality of his safe haven. Over the next few days, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Neighbors who had previously eyed Max with suspicion now smiled warmly, offering kind words about the dog's bravery in court. "He really showed them, didn't he?" one elderly woman said as she passed Tom in the hallway. Another neighbor even brought over homemade cookies, saying, "You two deserve something sweet after all you've been through." These small gestures of support meant more to Tom than he could express. They reminded him that kindness still existed in the world, and that Max had touched hearts far beyond his own. Still, not everything was perfect. The landlord remained distant, avoiding eye contact whenever they crossed paths. Though the legal battle was over, Tom sensed lingering resentment, a reminder that not everyone understood or accepted the importance of service animals. It stung, but Tom refused to let it overshadow his newfound peace. Instead, he focused on rebuilding his routine, finding comfort in the little things: morning walks with Max, quiet evenings spent reading with the dog curled at his feet, and the steady reassurance of Max's presence during moments of anxiety. One afternoon, as Tom sat on the couch flipping through channels, Max suddenly perked up, his ears swiveling toward the sound of footsteps outside. Before Tom could react, there was a knock at the door. His stomach tightened instinctively, but Max stayed calm, sitting alertly beside him. Taking a deep breath, Tom opened the door to find a delivery person holding a large envelope. "Package for you," the man said cheerfully, handing it over, before hurrying off. Curious, Tom tore open the envelope and pulled out a letter. Inside was a handwritten note from one of the spectators who had attended the hearing. "Dear Mr. Harris," it began, "I wanted to thank you for sharing your story. Watching you and Max together reminded me of my late husband, who also struggled with PTSD. Seeing how much Max means to you gave me hope that others like you can find strength in companionship too. Please take care of yourselves. You both inspire so many." Tom read the note several times, each word sinking deeper into his heart. Tears welled up in his eyes, blurring the ink on the page. He hadn't realized their story would resonate with others, let alone inspire someone else. To feel hope, Max nudged his hand gently as if sensing the swell of emotions. Tom laughed softly, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Looks like we're making a difference, buddy," he murmured. Max tilted his head, his tail thumping against the floor, in agreement. As the weeks passed, Tom noticed subtle changes within himself. He slept better, ate more regularly, and even ventured out to social events he would have avoided before. Friends from the veteran support group invited him to gatherings, marveling at how much livelier he seemed. "You look happier," one friend commented during a barbecue. "What's your secret?" Tom glanced down at Max, who was happily chewing on a squeaky toy nearby. "I guess I just stopped trying to do everything on my own," he replied with a smile. "Max taught me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's survival." Max continued to work his magic, proving time and again why he was so essential to Tom's life. During a particularly stressful week, when flashbacks threatened, To overwhelm him, Max stayed glued to his side, refusing to leave even for meals. On another occasion, when a loud thunderstorm rolled in, Max positioned himself between Tom and the window, shielding him from the lightning flashes that usually sent him into a panic. Each act of devotion reinforced the bond they shared, a partnership built on trust, love, and mutual dependence. But perhaps the most profound moment came on a crisp autumn morning, weeks after the trial. Tom decided to visit the local park, a place he had avoided since returning from the military due to its crowds and noise. With Max by his side, however, he felt brave enough to try. As they walked along the winding paths, leaves crunching underfoot, Tom marveled at how different the world felt. The chatter of children playing, the laughter of couples strolling hand in hand, and the distant bark of other dogs no longer triggered his anxiety. Instead, they blended into the background, a gentle hum of life moving forward. At one point, a young boy approached cautiously, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Is that your dog?" he asked shyly, pointing at Max. Tom nodded, smiling as Max sat politely, waiting for permission to be petted. "His name's Max," Tom said. "He helps me when I'm feeling scared or sad." The boy's face lit up, and he reached out tentatively to stroke Max's fur. "He's awesome," the boy declared, grinning. Tom chuckled, watching as Max leaned into the affectionate touch. In that moment, surrounded by nature and innocence, Tom realized something important. Max wasn't just helping him heal, he was teaching others about resilience, compassion, and the power of unconditional love. By the time they returned home, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Tom stood on the balcony, Max lying contentedly at his feet, and gazed out at the horizon. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, the battles fought, the fears faced, and the victories won. Life wasn't perfect, and challenges undoubtedly lay ahead. But with Max by his side, Tom knew he could face whatever came next. Together, they had proven that even in the darkest moments, light could break through. And sometimes, that light came in the form of a golden retriever with a heart as big as the sky. As the months rolled by, Tom and Max became fixtures in their community, symbols of resilience and hope. People often stopped them during their daily walks to say hello or share stories about their own struggles. Some spoke of loved ones battling mental health issues, while others confessed how seeing Tom and Max together gave them courage to seek help. Each interaction reminded Tom that his journey wasn't just about him. It was about breaking stigmas and showing others they weren't alone. One chilly winter morning, as snow blanketed the ground, Tom received an unexpected invitation in the mail. It was from a local veterans organization hosting an event to honor service members and their families. They wanted Tom and Max to attend, not only as guests, but also as speakers. At first, Tom hesitated. Public speaking had never been easy for him, especially in front of large crowds, but Max seemed to sense his uncertainty because he nudged Tom's hand gently, as if urging him to say yes. Finally, after much thought, Tom agreed. If sharing their story could inspire even one person, it would be worth it. The day of the event arrived crisp and bright despite the cold. Tom dressed carefully, choosing a suit jacket over his usual casual clothes. Max wore his service vest, freshly cleaned and polished, with a small American flag pinned to the side. Together, they walked into the hall where the gathering was being held. The room buzzed with energy, tables filled with food, banners hanging from the walls, and rows of chairs occupied by men and women who had served their country. As Tom scanned the crowd, he noticed many faces marked by hardship, yet glowing with pride. When it was their turn to speak, Tom stood nervously at the podium, Max sitting obediently beside him. He began by thanking everyone for coming, his voice shaky at first. Then, looking down at Max, he found his rhythm. He recounted their journey, the battles fought both overseas and at home, the court case, and the countless ways Max had changed his life. "This dog saved me," Tom said, his voice steady now, not just physically but emotionally. He reminds me every day that I'm not broken. I'm healing. And he shows me that asking for help is okay. As Tom spoke, the audience listened, intently, their eyes glistening with unshed tears. Some nodded in agreement while others reached for tissues. When he finished, the room erupted into applause, a standing ovation that brought tears to Tom's eyes. He bent down to hug Max tightly, whispering, "We did good, buddy," Max barked softly, his tail wagging furiously as if celebrating alongside him. Afterward, dozens of attendees approached Tom and Max, eager to shake hands or snap photos. One veteran, a grizzled man with a prosthetic leg, knelt awkwardly to pet Max. "You've got yourself a hero here," he said gruffly, his voice thick with emotion. "Wish I'd known about service dogs sooner. They might have helped me when I came back." Tom smiled warmly, patting the man on the shoulder. "It's never too late," he replied. "There are people out there who can help you find your own Max." That night, as they drove home under a canopy of stars, Tom reflected on the evening. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing their story had touched so many lives. It wasn't fame or recognition he sought. It was connection. Through Max, he had found a way to bridge the gap between isolation and community, turning pain into purpose. In the weeks that followed, invitations poured in. Schools asked Tom and Max to visit classrooms to teach children about empathy and teamwork. Local shelters requested their presence to comfort residents struggling with homelessness. Even hospitals invited them to cheer up patients enduring long recoveries. With each new opportunity, Tom grew more confident, more willing to step outside his comfort zone. And through it all, Max remained steadfast, his calm demeanor putting everyone at ease. But life wasn't without its challenges. Occasionally, old fears resurfaced, triggered by loud noises or crowded spaces. On those days, Tom relied heavily on Max's unwavering support. Whether it was guiding him away from overwhelming situations or simply staying close until the panic subsided, Max proved time and again why he was indispensable. These moments reinforced Tom's gratitude, not just for Max, but for the second chance at life he'd been given. Spring arrived, bringing warmer weather and longer days. One sunny afternoon, Tom decided to take Max to a nearby lake for a picnic. As they sat on a blanket overlooking the water, watching ducks paddle lazily across the surface, Tom felt a profound sense of peace. Life was far from perfect, but it was enough. Enough beauty, enough joy, enough love. Turning to Max, he scratched behind the dog's ears affectionately. "You know what, boy?" he said softly. "I used to think I didn't deserve happiness, but you showed me otherwise. You remind me every day that I'm worthy of love. And that's something I'll never forget." Max responded with a contented sigh, resting his head on Tom's knee. In that moment, surrounded by nature and quiet companionship, Tom realized how far they'd come. From the darkest depths of despair to this serene lakeside retreat, their journey had been one of transformation. Not just for Tom, but for everyone whose lives they touched along the way. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Tom made a silent promise to himself. He vowed to keep sharing their story, to continue advocating for others like him who needed support. And he swore to cherish every moment with Max, knowing that their bond was rare and precious. Because in the end, it wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. Together they had proven that no matter how heavy the burden, there was always light ahead. All it took was trust, love, and the steadfast loyalty of a four-legged friend named Max.